And I am delighted to bring on the next panel where we're going to talk about some of the skills involved in the supply chain and have two very accomplished and successful women to do that. First is Diane Wetherington, who is the founder and CEO of iDecision Sciences. And that acronym will be IDS for future reference. And they offer consulting and software solutions primarily to the food industry. And at IDS, Diane has already built and launched two previous software businesses, including iFood.ds. Martha Montoya, who is joining us from London, is the founder and CEO of Ag Tools. With over 30 years of worldwide food and agricultural and supply chain experience, Martha's career in the ag industry started while sourcing from the Americas to New Zealand, Australia, Asia, and it has provided her with the knowledge of the product from the source of delivery. And ultimately, she has become a real leader in the industry. Welcome to both of you, and thanks for joining us. I like the question our previous panel started out with. Diane, tell us about your businesses and what you're doing now so some people can get some context around the nature of the companies that you've started. And then Martha will do the same thing with Ag Tools.
Sure. Well, first of all, I started in the food industry in 2006 with the first outbreak, E. coli outbreak in spinach. And at that point, I was doing consulting work and mostly public health oriented. And we were noticing, well, of course, with the food outbreak, there was a huge need for not only the guidelines to work with the trade associations like Western Growers and at that point PMA, but there was a real need for software tools. And so based on that work, we started developing a software product. And I'd already built one software company inside of iDecision Sciences. The company was officially formed in 2009. So we built another one focused on food safety and spun that off. I was the CEO there until really a little over a year ago. And now I'm working on another area. But I would say my whole career, when I think about it, and I was listening to the conversations, I'd say my whole career has really been in supply chain. My first job was in demand forecasting, consumer demand forecasting. So I think it's always been in supply chain.
All right, Martha, talk to us about Ag Tools. And by the way, do a little bragging. Talk about a nice recognition you just received.
Just won an award. But I think that I want to follow Diane's thought that when did I start supply chain? I actually started supply chain with my grandfather and the coffee farms when we had to organize the trucks to be able to come to our little town to pick up the coffee on time so we could make it to the places where we have to move them together to be able to ship them on the boats. And even as I was growing older, and I mean older, I was 17, 15, we had also flowers. And believe it or not, and for all of the ones who are listening, supply chain is it's an international play. And I want you to think about this, not just as a local, it's heavily international. And I say that because one of my first jobs was to make sure that we would ship roses and carnations from Colombia to Europe. And I will have to sit on by the runway of the airplanes to make sure that my flowers will leave and nobody will put anything on the boxes of the flowers that will be detrimental to the flowers and to the company. And so that's literally, I've been in the supply chain logistics. I used to be logistics throughout my life. And when I landed in the United States, it was natural to just keep sourcing and delivering. So today what I do is I leave after so many years going around the world doing this. I understood that what we needed is to level the playing field of data. As somebody mentioned earlier, data analyst, data technology is the way we are going to make sure we waste less, we provide more, and we supply more. It's like a Bloomberg of the industry. In a real-time dashboard, you can see what's going on with fruits and vegetables. And we just won the award, Trient Radical Award in Des Moines, Iowa, because finally we're starting to understand that increasing yield and lowering costs is not just the solution for farmers. It's also understanding the world markets to be able to manage better your crops.
There's a lot there. And I think, Diane, you talked about reflecting on the previous conversations. And Shandor really I liked his close in terms of skills, technology. And both of you, obviously, your backgrounds speak to data, the necessity for information, analytics. So talk about the important role of that. When we were first visiting last week, I'm kind of old school. To me, the supply chain was, I got an order, put it in the system, and the truck showed up and we loaded it and good to go. And as Martha just said, way more global. But this thirst for data and information is obviously a critical piece of the supply chain. So could I have each of you kind of reflect on that?
I think too, it was the conversation where you're wanting to know where the produce is in the supply chain. That's just the one area where if you're shipping perishable products, you have to know where that product is. Or if you're Martha sitting there on the runway, watching her flowers taking off, you want to know that item is going to be safe and it's going to be delivered and it's not going to be harmed throughout the supply chain. So that's one element of data, but it's far more complicated than that, because when you're talking about supply chain data, you're talking about everything from all the supplier information you have, who you could possibly source from, who you're buying from, other people in your company, how they're going to deliver, all the issues around it, packaging materials, transportation, weather-related issues, whether the product's going to be harvested on time. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And so with this abundance of data, key to being a successful supply chain person is really to be able to take that data and not only have it in a system, but to be able to use it to make sense out of it and to build models or to help inform decision making.
Well, and Matt talked about one of the things that companies needed to do was make an investment. So if you go back to the supply chain where the game changed, when you see the word panic, that's good to get a few folks to listen to us. But things that we take for granted, is like a pallet, all of a sudden there were pallet shortages. And has it been your experience? And Martha, I'll ask you the same thing, though my observation with you, Martha, is you're coming of it, and feel free to correct me, more from the market and what do people need to know relative to market. But if you, Diane, are companies currently set up to really integrate all of that information gathering at this point, if you look at the supply chain, or is that kind of the next phase? That's where we're heading.
I think that's the future. I mean, you can talk, it depends on what industry you're in, but obviously the perishable industry is so complicated because we have a supply chain with changing components. We talked a little bit about vertical integration before. Some areas were not very vertically integrated in this perishable industry supply chain, and that's affecting us, and it makes it even more complicated. But because the fact your product's evolving over time, it's aging from the time you harvest it to the time the consumer eats it, then it's incredibly complicated. And the systems we have today in place, most of the systems we're relying on are the ERP systems or the internal accounting systems within these companies. But you need to have these dynamic systems that can talk to each other, where you can pull data, and then you need to have the analytics capability, and you need to have forecasting capabilities. And this is the wave of the future, to be able to have mass data sets that today really don't exist.
Martha, what are your thoughts? You mentioned becoming the Bloomberg, the fresh industry. What you obviously with Ag Tools have begun building that system. I know I'm always impressed when you tell me how many programmers you have working for you to get all this done. And I think you would also say you're still a work in progress.
I would say, and I'm following, and I'm going to follow Diane Dennis on one thought for the young listening to us. This is the beginning of. This is like you get in now, and let's talk 20 years from now, you all are going to build this. We're just trying our best to catch up with all the things that we have not done right for the last several years or decades. But as I see, and I tell always my team, let's take a deep breath. And yes, we will make mistakes because the world is not there yet ready for all of us. So let's be patient, let's be kind to each other, but we have no choice. And so young people that get involved right now, even our adults in our companies, and I mean adults, seasoned people in the industry, we're building it too. We we're settled on having a logistic person managing the shipments. That was that. Well, there's too much now data coming to all of us for many different reasons. Food safety is one, logistics is another one, market conditions another one, geopolitical issues. I mean, everything is starting to come up. As I sit here, we're writing an article for all the Secretary of Agricultures worldwide that they're meeting in Paris, that I'll be with them. The data of the governments around the world are also broken down. So there's a whole new era that we see the youngsters coming up. And so this is the perfect time for this whole program to start, because it is the building of the blocks for the future. I'm excited for them and for all of us.
Well, then let's take the question that Tom kicked over to our panel with, given what you both said, and Martha, we'll just stay with you and then go over to Diane. So what does that translate into software today? Or is it software yet to come? But are there some foundational programs to think about? What if you're advising young people and getting somewhat familiar with something, where do they start?
So I want to make sure that all the ones listening to the webinar today understand that the software industry was built over 40, 50 years ago on what they call relational databases. And the relational database was a very structured database because everything worked fine in lines, no problem. Everything from software to the whole world. We, the ones on produce and perishables, knew that things were not working always right. I mean, there was always something happening in the industry, as it was brought in earlier in the conversation. There was always things happening, and we ended up starting using spreadsheets and notepads and papers because the software industry was not there for us. And now the world is starting to understand that there's a shift on this whole data world. When there's an IoT reading the water usage on a farm, well, today's one thing, tomorrow's another one, next summer is differently, next winter is different. So I think that for those who are looking into science and computer science, I will cautiously tell you all, don't let always something be told that is the only thing. And I say that because my brother Gustavo, when he was 22 years old, he was kind of on the non-relational databases. He never wanted to deal with relational databases. He was a young kid, and Amazon called him. And that whole Jeff Bezos became what Jeff Bezos is today, non-relational databases. So he was a young kid taken from Silicon Valley straight into Seattle because his thinking was, this is not working right. And then somebody, adult, took us in a different path. So don't settle as young kids to always think that we know it all. In fact, you might know more than we do because your brain is completely clean.
Diane?
I obviously agree with Martha. I'd say, well, you could look at our companies and the work that we've done and the software we built, and I'd say that's a good place to start today. But I don't think that there is the ultimate software out there that exists right now in the industry. I think it's so new and evolving. And here's the other thing. You know, if you've got a 4-year degree ahead of you, the half-life of software it's pretty short. So it's constantly changing is what I'm trying to tell you. There are going to be new players out there emerging. With the traceability standards being put in place, you're going to see more mergers and movement in the software industry that's going to affect, I believe, the produce industry. And so you'll see new companies coming out there. But just rest assured that Excel is not going to be the software of the future that's going to be sufficient. I mean, we need something far more sophisticated than that. Yes, we need data analytics, and there are several companies that offer data analytics packages, but I think we don't even know what the ultimate solution is today.
You know, we've listening to Matt and Chander and Tom, and we had this conversation part of our prep. So we're talking about software, we're talking about, you know, maybe perhaps the skills that are associated with that. How do you, in your mind, because both of you have experience with this, you've had companies that you've built, you hire people, and then they've got to get familiar with the produce industry or whatever facet of perishables. What does that look like, and how long does it take? Diane, let me start with you and then get over to Martha on that one.
Well, it's a journey. I think this is one of the key issues that you have. And whenever you're hiring somebody, do you hire somebody who's really strong in software or technical side, or do you hire somebody who's an expert in produce and you teach them software? And there's no good answer either way. It just comes down to the individual. I will say that people think that they can learn the produce industry overnight, and that's not true. I mean, it's a complicated industry. So you need somebody who's got, I'd say, good technical skills, good people skills, and is willing to learn and to not assume that whatever they've learned in the past is good enough or enough. They just need to keep learning.
And I will follow that, Diane. You're so right. It's either, you always wonder, either or. I will go a step further. It's definitely one of the things when I decided to launch Act Tools was precisely because there are so many young people coming to the industry that would not have the wonderful blessing that I had, for example, that I had gentlemen at that point, because there were only gentlemen at that point that have been in the industry 20, 30 years and taught me the industry through the years. And there's no time anymore for that. I mean, literally I would say it took me 10 years to semi-understand the whole complexity of the industry, but I had mentors that have been at that 30 years before.
Right.
Well, how do we compress that? And part of my whole Act Tools or launching Act Tools was to, how do we do a crash course? So we save some of the young generations 5, 10, 15 years. And then now they can start finding other solutions. That's number one. But number two is, I think that we personally, Dennis, when we look for people in the industry, we look for people that are 70 years old and people that are 20 years old, literally, but they are creative and they're inquisitive and they want to learn. And if they have that, you can solve anything. It's the hardest part is that this is a moving industry, technology, tech, agricultural, supply chain, all is moving continuously every day. So you're going to be in a crash course every single day of the industry. And so if you're not a person who likes to learn every day, this is not for you. But if you love to be always learning things, this is the place to be. It's never a dull moment, as it was mentioned earlier.
Let me just add to that, Dennis. Okay. I think what's really important is, I think for somebody who's in school right now, if you can get involved in an internship program, that is the best opportunity. Because if you're on the science side, or if you're on the business side, or you have a technical background, or you're interested in it, this is the perfect opportunity. If you have internships over the summer, during the years with these companies, so that you can build your technical skills at the same time that you're building your industry knowledge, I think that's the perfect environment to be in.
Okay. There's a couple questions I want to get at, and then we'll see if anyone in the audience has something. But I want to close kind of the formal part of our conversation and ask each one of you. I know sometimes when I'm on a panel, when it's over, I walk away going, gee, I wish I had said. So Martha, sitting there in your hotel room in London, is there anything like, I want to make sure I said this, or they need to know? And Diane, I'll ask you the same question.
Having been through all these incubators, accelerators, I think I'm becoming a pro at this thing. And I've done it purposely. I used to play tennis and I used to play in tournaments, and the only way you get better is by competing all the time. And so after going through all this process, I see one common denominator across in other industries, not in our industry. It's young people coming up with their own ideas, even at this stage of the college, and trying to come up with that solution because it's motivating them to do a lot of research. And I appreciate and like internships. Sometimes the internships are very limiting because it's only certain things that they are going to do. And what we want is one of those young generations that are starting to come up with these ideas. I'll give one simple one, Figma, which just right now sold to one of the largest companies in the world for billions. The kid did it at school, college, created the idea of how to design this tool for engineers and eventually for the whole world. And less than 4 or 5 years, as a young student, spin off as a company, right? So and I understand it's not as simple as consumer or other industries, but I think that the youngsters that are listening to us, I will request, think about some solution and build it yourself in your spare time as a company, because that will give you either the job, because now it shows creativity, but it also because maybe you come up with an idea that none of us thought about it.
Okay, Diane?
I want to take a slightly different approach and just talk a little bit about how important I think supply chain is to the industry and food industry as a whole. My background, as I mentioned, started in food safety. I've done a lot of work in food safety and supply chain. But when I first started in food safety, the number of people inside the companies who had a job that was called food safety, there weren't that many companies in the state of California in the produce industry. The large ones, yes, but the smaller ones, it would be the office manager who also had the food safety role. And what I've seen evolve over this time since 2006 is it's become a dedicated function and a very highly valued function in companies. So now we have university programs who are teaching this and the science side of it, and it's grown throughout the country. So we have a lot of qualified people coming out of the universities now in food safety. The other thing is that the food safety people have a seat at the table at the C level, at the executive level. And so the analogy here is we're going to see the same thing, I believe, happen on the supply chain side, where today we may not have that many programs out there, but to get in on the ground floor is an incredible opportunity because I think it's going to grow throughout the country. Then roles with inside these companies, you're going to start to see more dedicated supply chain people because people realize how critical it is, and it's still critical. And you're going to see the seat at the executive level coming. So I think it's a great opportunity now.
My next question, and I'm glad you brought up your food safety background, because as we've gone through our conversation, this really did seem to me to be analogous. I think a couple of our panelists, I think Matt may be too young, but if you were around September, well, I'm sure he was in the industry, but September 2006, when the spinach crisis hit, food safety shifted from a department to a boardroom consideration because it was an existential threat. And that's what's kind of occurring to me over and over, because one of the questions we had is what are the adoption issues? And to some degree, COVID hit us over the head like food safety, though in a kind of a different way, and the particulars with each different company. But it would seem to me, and Martha, you might echo this with your experience with Ag Tools. This thing is heading to the executive suite, and supply chain is going to be at the table.
It is at the table. In fact, with COVID-19, we found out a lot of C-suite level company were fired because they didn't have it under control. So now, yes, it is a C-level, supply chain, procurement. I mean, all that is at the C-level, which was not. It was just the chief financial officer, CEO, and COO were like the three CEOs. Now, no longer. You're right. So, like you said, Diana, it's the beginning of a career for many that we wish we could have had 20-some years ago, and but now it's the time for them to take it over.
Well, and I think you both answered this, but let's kind of finish up with this final takeaway message to the students from each of you. I mean, I think you've dropped some pretty good breadcrumbs here, but final thoughts from the students on terms of how they ought to approach this. Between you two and Tom's panel, Kevin's comments, if supply chain interest has been peaked, what should they be thinking about? Martha, I'll let you go first.
Me? Okay. Definitely the corporations are looking for you, 100%. So just prepare yourself better, understand a little bit better the industry if you can. I mean, we have one within the industry in the region, in the college, it's within the region, but we have seen only farming and selling. And we need to start seeing the line that goes from beginning to end of the supply chain. So just prepare yourself better, come up with ideas, test them yourself, tinker with them, and definitely do the internship.
Okay. Diane?
I would say that this is an exciting time to be involved in the supply chain, and this is a career for you. Think about It is a journey. It's not as if I'm going to be this most successful supply chain person overnight. I need to get to know the industry. I need to get to know the company. I need to get to know so many different departments inside that company. And if you're interested in complex systems, if you're interested in cross-functional role and working with a lot of different diverse people, and I would say people skills is huge. If you work with suppliers, if you work with any company, just think about, put yourself in their shoes and their role and try to work as an ally, because you never know when you're going to need them and vice versa. So build those relationships. And if that's what you're interested in, this is an awesome career.
All right, terrific. Well, you have lived up to all our expectations. I want to thank both of you for your time and contribution. And I think I would trade with our CSUMB students in the audience to have the future in front of them. So hopefully they've learned a thing or two. I'll bet they have. And so thank you. And with that, I want to turn it over to the chairman of the Grower Shipper Association Foundation, Lori Custer. Lori, it's all yours.
Hi, Dennis. Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists and speakers today. This is a very dynamic area of agriculture, and I hope the students have some piqued interest in learning a bit more about supply chain management and hopefully pursuing a career in that area. On behalf of the Grower Shipper Foundation and our partners at CSUMB, we want to thank all of you for attending our 16th Creator Vision. Special thanks to the incredible staff at CSUMB for putting the webinar together, including Mary Lou Shockley, the interim dean of the College of Business, and Andrew Lawson, the dean of the College of Science. I'd like to thank Lisa Dobbins, the executive director of the Grower Shipper Foundation as well. We'd also like to thank our media sponsor, KAZU, and our produce sponsor, Taylor Farms.